Hello, my name is Fraser Simons. This is my channel, Springboard Thought. Today I'm doing Leo Bancroft's tag, but it's also like a hashtag as well, which I think is really smart. I should probably hashtag a lot of different tags so that you can like collate all the data instead of just searching and YouTube not being very good about it. But it's called Stand With Trans Kids, the tag. The first thing to do is to tag people. So I wanted to tag some channels that were fairly new to me as well as a couple old ones, but it goes without saying that I think anyone who wants to do the tag should do the tag. I think some solidarity with trans kids is something that anyone could do, of course, and should do if they are up for it. So I wanted to tag Rainier Books, which is pretty new to me, but I've seen his channel mentioned around quite a bit before. The Library of Alexandria, who's a fantasy booktuber that's pretty big, but he is the Book Jeopardy guy, and I've gotten a lot of enjoyment from watching those videos, even though they're all heavily focused towards fantasy and they didn't know what Gormenghast was. I'll also take Alicia Guzman, Bibliosophie, Shelley Swearingen, and Remembered Reads specifically. But, please don't feel that I'm pressuring you. And if you do the tag, please make sure to let me know, mention me. I'll be scrolling through the hashtag anyway to watch people's video on this, but, if in case it's missed, it's always nice to be mentioned now that you're mentionable with more than 500 subscribers. Tell us about some books on your TBR pile featuring a trans non-binary character or nonfiction about trans non-binary stuff. So right now in my Libby app, I have Manhunt that just arrived today, as well as Redefining Realness that just arrived today as well. One by Gretchen Felker Martin, and the former by Janet Mock. And then I also have physically Tell Me I'm Worthless, which is supposed to be amazing, queer horror, Alison Rumfitt, and Bob the Booker turned me onto this, so I have him to thank. It's not out in North America yet, but I ordered it stealth style from Book Depository, and this will be a read coming up soon. I have all my other obligations out of the way. It's time to dig in. I probably have a lot more on my TBR. If you add me on Goodreads, which please feel free to do, you can either follow me or you can friend me. I don't care which. I'd prefer friends so it's not asymmetrical, but it's up to your comfort. So do whatever makes you feel good or want. And I have a shelf specifically that's LGBTQIA2S+, which is all encompassing, and I should probably drill down into specifics, but I already have a lot of shelves, so we'll see. But there's also the nice thing about being on Goodreads, even though it's owned by Amazon, is that there are many lists, and one that was fantastic was trans characters by trans authors, and there was like 700 listed there. So I have a lot more on my TBR than just that, but that's sort of immediate. Like, these will be done in a matter of a week or something. Recommend a favorite book, show, movie featuring a trans non-binary character. So I just watched one recently, actually, which is Lupe, and that was phenomenal. So it's an indie film that I got off iTunes. The only way I could find it for some reason was like that. And it's only $5, at least in Canada. She's a professional boxer. She still presents as a man and is not willing to proceed with her transition until she finds her sister. And so there's like a really complex duality. It is like a quite sad story, but also hopeful, inspirational. It's badass to have a trans woman character. I'm not sure if the actor is trans, to be honest, but the character is, and I think it's portrayed very well. Just like being kind of a badass Street Fighter type person. Like she has to take on these big dudes in order to navigate the spaces, because these guys are like protecting the trafficked women and whatnot. And she is just, yeah, it's just an incredible story, fantastic ending, very well paced, cheap for $5. I thought it was fantastic. It's incredibly underrated. I also really like Sense8 and Predestination. Sense8, I think probably most people know about, but I just think it's such an incredible show. And Predestination, maybe you don't know, but it's one of those movies where the less you know about it, the more interesting it will be. So just check it out. It's a sci-fi movie in which the protagonist is trying to stop, by way of time travel, an event that occurs that makes shockwaves across history. That's all I can tell you. Everyone has their own journey, and no one demographic is a monolith. Recommend a book with a journey, however you define that. One of my all-time favorite books is by Raphael Carter, The Fortunate Fall. This is a cyberpunk book way ahead of its time. It is, I think, a 92 book. Raphael Carter, at the time of this publication and before, identified as what we would probably call non-binary now, and I think we're using Caesar back then as well. I have not been able to find any information about the author since then, when I looked for this book a few years ago. But the book is expressly queer. It deals with a lot of different issues around state suppression of queer identities. It is about a woman who is a telepresence, which is essentially, imagine a news broadcaster that has a chip in their head that enables them to stream exactly what they see and edit it like professionally, as you would see on like a news broadcast, but also send their feelings, their thoughts, their memories to their base. And so there's like a parasocial relationship established as well, where people subscribe to her channel, and she goes and does all these strange stories, usually about endangered animals and post-climate change type stuff. Famously in this book, the last whale was killed like 10 years ago, so that kind of tells you what kind of dystopia it is. And she gets a tip that there is indeed one last whale living in existence, and if she's willing to meet the person, then they will give her the scoop if she meets these certain conditions. She gets her primary sort of contact, her essentially editor is what you could think of it as, is the main sort of other person, and they're both like queer people living in this world trying to navigate it. And then simultaneously there's a dual timeline thing that happens sometimes where we get to be in her past, which is quite heavy. It is, yeah, just an incredible book. Always off the lists of the best cyberpunk books of all time, because people don't know what they're talking about. None of us knows everything, even about our own identities, especially since we're not a monolith and each have our own journey. What is a book that taught you something, either about yourself or the world around you? So Avery Alder is a Canadian tabletop role-playing game designer, and she made Monster Hearts. This is the second edition of that game. If you don't know what a tabletop role-playing game is, think of Dungeons and Dragons, except that with that framework of a conversation and people rolling dice, you can create a whole different kind of collaborative fiction, or social fiction, as sometimes it is called. This is recreating YA fiction fantasy that is quite dark typically. You embody characters that are going to a high school. Each character archetype is a different sort of trope. So there's like the vampire, the werewolf, the sort of like succubus. There's even like the mundane person who's just like the side along character, like that guy who really likes Buffy in Buffy, who I never remember the name of, and is kind of the and who is like quite toxic in his own right on the show. But so it's about expressly embodying queer identities. You don't have a decision about that when you play the game. The mechanics of the game make it so that the central conceit of every character cannot define their sexuality, and certain situations provoked when you roll the dice tell you if your character is turned on or not. And then there's the darker component of it where your sort of monster inside can take over your character and do damage. So it's literally about the kind of things that dark fantasy YA is about, where it's the interplay between very like toxic harm that can be exchanged in queer relationships and non-queer relationships as well. And you have to relinquish control and certain parts of agency because it is, you know, horror adjacent. But there's also rules for playing an ace character, so an asexual character in the book that is got its own rules to it that were derived from asking ace people about their identity and how it might work with a game like this. It is completely fantastic. Everyone that I know who have played this game, it has changed their lives, and I think every trans person that I know personally came out as trans after playing this game. So it helps people to use a safe space to try out different things, make a character with different pronouns, with a different sexuality, to just be in a safe space with your friends, and through the lens of fiction, try off different identity components and see what happens. At the very least, it'll be a good time. And there is, crucially, safety tools for the narrative when you're playing this game. There's lots of text in how to do it properly, and to not create toxic dynamics at your actual table when you're playing this, and what the game is actually about and trying to do. When things are hard in the world or in our lives, sometimes there are things we can do to help center and refocus ourselves, to bring us joy, to keep us going, to keep living, resisting, being our authentically amazing selves. What are things you do to center yourself or find joy? So, as you'll see behind me, some of my favorite artists, I listen to vinyl quite a lot. Typically it'll be alternative, like very low-key music, acoustic type stuff, but you never know. Like Jackie Shane is a legendary Canadian singer artist who only died pretty recently, I think, like no more than 10 years ago anyway. But she was legendary in the Montreal scene. She's a trans artist. That album is phenomenal. And otherwise reading, doing my own game design, playing games, talking to people. What's your walk-on music or your feel at home in your own body music? Oh, I just kind of gave that away. Probably more like City and Color and Iron and Wine are some of my favorites to just sort of be at home in my own body with and dwell in my thoughts and feelings, I guess. I don't know if I have like a specific walk-on song. Yeah, I don't think so. I'm a pretty like low-key, anxious, introvert type person, so finding mentors, people of wisdom, or heroes can be another way to help us navigate life. What are some of your mentors, or who are some of your mentors? Can you share something they taught you or inspired you to learn more about? I would just go back to playing more games. Like, there's so much design space from queer people that is just absolutely incredible. And in playing their games, they're almost always going to be about navigating spaces that aren't heteronormative, where you learn more about yourself, more about other people. It's a different kind of empathy exercise, of course, and I'm like the most introverted, sort of meek person, really, and I still am able to play these things, so it's just like a whole different kind of level, while not having to go full on into like community theater or LARPing or something like that. It's just completely different, and I don't really have the time to go into like how this design space is different, but yeah, a lot of people only think about Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder and stuff like that, but there is so much room and work that is being done in the design space adjacent to Dungeons and Dragons that is far more compelling, interesting, innovative, fantastic stuff. And I consider pretty much any game that comes out in the indie space to be certainly a peer and something that is going to teach me. And the design space keeps massively shifting every couple years. There's now even games called lyric games that basically are people who write tabletop role-playing games in which they're not meant to be specifically play-tested or played, but provoke the same emotions of reading a poem, except through the lens of game design, which kind of blows my mind. So who are some out trans non-binary booktubers, Instagrammers, authors, actors, etc. who you'd like to shout out? So I follow Leo Bancroft, of course, and Sekevi, which I think most people have shouted out as well. I'm not aware of any other trans people on Booktube specifically in the same niche of what I'm looking at. I think there's a few that are doing YA stuff specifically, which I'm more or less getting out of. But otherwise, Elliot Page is incredible, a Canadian icon. Jamie Clayton, Hunter Schafer from Euphoria, Jen Richards from Tales of the City, which if you haven't seen on Netflix is just fantastic. It made me pick up the book afterwards. I hadn't ever heard of that series before until I watched the Netflix series. And of course there's 2 or 3 previous series before even that one, which you can kind of tell when you're watching the new Netflix one, where you're kind of like, these people have like a lot of shared knowledge, and feels like there's some throwbacks happening that you're not aware of, and it's because there is. Neon Yang is fantastic as well. The Tensorate books here have been collected under the correct name, Neon Yang, into one volume that you can find now. And this is, I believe Neon Yang is non-binary, and this is a fantasy set in a obviously fictional Asian city in which people get to choose their gender around a coming of age type situation, so like 15, 16, 17, something like that. And then there's like a really cool magic system. They're hunting magical beasts that there's like a twist around, I guess you could say. And it centers on 2 twins, at least the first 2 books, that are in line to adopt the throne, and their world is rocked when the powerful empire that has been created comes under scrutiny, and there's like a rebellion, essentially. It's absolutely fantastic. Reads quickly, very inventive, non-Western centric, fantastic stuff with actual non-binary characters with they them pronouns. What are some organizations you'd like to shout out for supporting trans kids, trans folks? So everyone knows the Trevor Project, but there's also, I've never said it out loud and I can't find a correct pronunciation. I've always pronounced it E-Gale, but it might be E-Gale. I don't know how else you'd say it, but this is like the most predominant organization, LGBT QIA plus organization in Canada that I'm aware of. Like, they have actively been in the courts seeking justice for the community, and putting forth bills and educating people and whatnot. So they're fantastic. Hopefully I'll remember to put like a little screenshot of the organization there. And so most of the time I've donated to the Trevor Project or to them, being in Canada. So, and I've already tagged people, but again, if you would like to do the tag, I think you just should. And otherwise, I will see you next video. Bye.